Hi, we're here today with Michael Dent at his wonderful aloe garden in the suburb of Taringa in Brisbane. Michael's just recently had his garden open to the public because this is the time of year we're actually filming in winter time when they're in their most floriferous state. What I'd like to talk to Michael about is what got you started in aloes. I mean, you've got your garden open, but just having your garden open is not the end of it. You actually eat, sleep, breathe, live aloes 7 days a week.
Quite right, Claire. I guess it was perhaps 10 years ago when Brisbane was in the peak of quite a severe drought. I sort of realised that we weren't growing flowers in Brisbane. If you drive down our streets, there weren't a lot of flowers. And I guess I was born in South Africa and I knew about aloes, and I knew that these new flowering aloes were big, easy growing flowering plants. So it was a way of people being able to grow flowers very easily and very reliably. So we looked to importing a range of plants that were bred by a breeder in Johannesburg, and we now market them across Australia.
Yep, through your nursery.
Yes, that's
Aloe
right.
Aloe.
Okay, that's right.
And that's a great idea too, because in winter there isn't as many things in flower, so it's great that they flower at that time of year with minimal water and care. What are some of the misconceptions of aloe plants in the garden, like in the suburban garden, that you find that people have struggled to sort of overcome, and you've managed to break down those barriers?
There are many misconceptions, Claire. The first one, most people only know about aloe vera, and of course vera is one of more than 700 different species of aloe, and it's one that's used for hand creams. So the flowering aloes are got nothing to do with vera. Vera is not really a good garden plant. The other misconception is that aloes are associated by many, quite wrongly, with the agaves or the cactus which come from America. In fact, aloes are lilies, effectively, from Africa, and they love these flowering aloes love the rain. So they're not desert plants at all. So they really love the rain. And in fact, during periods of rain, they thrive. It's just that they're able to store the water in their leaves so that in the dry times they can survive off what they've stored, and then when it rains again, they suck up the water again.
So in saying all of that, you're really saying they don't have to be just allocated with other succulent plants, and you don't have to have sort of, a xeriscape sort of garden to have aloes. You can have them with all sorts of other plants.
Of course, and there are many plants that will grow well with aloes. Things like begonias, things like there's actually most plants. Even if you love camellias, you can grow aloes with camellias. It's just that the companion plantings you use may need, if they need more water, the aloes will get more water. If they don't need a lot of water, the aloes will survive without that water.
So they're quite flexible.
Exactly,
and I'd have to say at home I'm having a bit of fun experimenting in my new garden, having them with natives as well as cottage plants, because they marry in quite well. And in your garden, which we'll have a look at, they're with daisies, they're with coleus, you've got them with a range of, you've got alströmerias, Peruvian lilies, you've got also a whole array of different types of flowering plants.
Yes, I actually particularly prefer planting aloes with other plants. I think a monoculture is fine, but really many contrasting leaf textures brings out the beauty in the aloes, and it's a much better for the garden than just having one culture.
And in pots, do they lend themselves to being in pots? Now I know that there's obviously, looking at the garden, there's a whole range. There's some small growing ones, medium growing ones, and then you've got some very, very tall species. Which ones would lend themselves best to pot culture, if at all?
They all are able to grow in pots because the root structure is not very huge. I would say the smaller ones or the medium-sized ones are perhaps best for pots for the reason the tall ones have a big rosette and it gets quite heavy. So the plant can easily fall over unless it's a really huge
big
pot. So the big ones will grow in pots, but they need to have a big pot, otherwise they become top heavy.
Okay, and once you've decided that you've become an aloe addict, a bit like myself, thanks to you, you have them in the garden in the pots. What kind of care do they need? You say that they'll tolerate dry, they'll also tolerate a reasonable amount of moisture. Are there any other cultural tips that people should keep in mind once they're embarking on growing aloes?
Yes, they're very easy to grow. The maintenance required is perhaps just deadheading the spent flowers once they've finished flowering, and even that's not necessary, it's more aesthetic.
Yeah.
In terms of their growing requirements, they require good sunlight and free draining soil, but they do perform better with rich soil, so soil with humus in it. So in my garden we add cow manure in the spring to introduce to help the flowering, and it's a bit like an elite athlete. He's not going to do well if he has a poor diet. If he has a healthy diet, he'll be able to flourish. And of course these aloes are bred to flower, so to give them that capability, it's good to
back it
feed
up
them
with some fertilizer.
And then of course in the really dry times, the aloes are not going to die if they don't get water, but if you have 4 months of no rain, which we've had before, they will benefit from some water, because it just keeps them healthy. And of course a healthy aloe is a much better specimen, more disease resistant, and will flower better.
Okay, so the other benefits of keeping aloe, or some of the pros of having aloes, obviously the flowers are spectacular. They can be used as a cut flower, I've seen as well, quite successfully. What are some of the great reasons you would want to have aloes in the garden? You know, do they attract butterflies or bees or?
Yes, I mean there's many reasons, but that's perhaps one of the things that I find most exciting. Our gardens today are fairly sterile, and we don't see many bees and birds in the gardens. And having flowering plants like aloes, which have nectar in them, bring the nectar feeding birds, they bring the bees, they bring the butterflies, but they don't just bring the nectar feeding birds. Because they bring the insects, you get the insect feeding birds. So a whole biodiversity happens, and of course it happens at a time, as you said earlier, when there's not a lot in flower in the garden. So during the autumn and the winter months, so really the birds have got somewhere to go, the bees have got somewhere to go, be that native bees or introduced bees.
Okay, and so that's fabulous. Then you've got native bees, European honeybees, birds that are nectar sourcing, birds that are insectivorous. So there's a whole array of sort of, you know, I can see some beautiful blue-faced honeyeaters behind us now. And that's people are very conscious of that these days, I think, bringing in those things.
Yes, because a garden is not just a sterile space. It needs to. There's sounds, there's smells, there's activity, there's buds coming out. The whole of nature's cycle we need to embrace. And too often we have this view that someone gets a landscaper in, they put a garden in as if it's a piece of furniture, a sterile piece of furniture that looks the same all year round. And then that's not what gardening's about. It's about living with nature and nature's creatures.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Blooming in Brisbane, and for more information visit us on Facebook, Blooming in Brisbane. I'd like to thank our sponsors, Queensland Organics and Plants Plus. Thank you and have a fantastic evening. Queensland Organics has been manufacturing a range of high quality organic and organic based fertilisers since 1995.
I use Organic Extra exclusively through my entire garden. Not only does it promote strong, healthy, lush growth in all my foliage plants, but it also enhances the flowering of my heliconias and gingers. The fact that it is organic and slow release and doesn't alter the structure of the soil has to be a bonus.
Plants Plus is a proud sponsor of Blooming in Brisbane, and for our loyal viewers, mention Blooming in Brisbane and receive your free bag of Plants Plus potting mix. T's and C's applies. Visit plantsplus.com.au to find out your local garden centre. Is your local garden centre Plants Plus Loganholme, Timbara Garden Centre, Greenwell Plants Plus, Plants Plus Ipswich or Redcliffe Garden Centre? Visit plantsplus.com.au.